At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Here we go. Booty and the crew, exclusive interview. Welcome to the show. Let's have some fun. Sweep Unplugged starts now.
What is up, everybody? It is another Sweep Unplugged with Rudy Campos Jr. Be sure to go to our YouTube page, and all you got to do is search Sweep the League TV. You guys have already been seeing everything we've been releasing. STL Music has had another album release. We've got another Sweep Unplugged. We've had 2 or 3 already just for 2025. So the biggest thing we've been going over is fitness. We've also had Oscar Vasquez recently talking about, the back part of stuff that you don't realize, which is the financial part in 2025. What are we talking about today? Well, today's Sweep Unplugged goes hand in hand because as San Antonio Spurs fans here in San Antonio, Texas, you're always wondering about the future. Spurs aren't doing so well. You're wondering who's the next best prospect to come out. How good are they? I see the potential in them, but do you really see the true potential out of a prospect coming out of college or even overseas? And today's Sweep Unplugged kind of dives into that a little bit because not only is it NBA, it's NFL. It can go all the way to MLB, Olympic. Our guest has a 25-plus year working with athletes and teams in general, unlocking their potential and elevating their performance with something called AIQ. We're going to get all into that. Don't be worried. Don't be scared. We're not going to unlock your potential just yet. We're going to get all the information that way. If you ever wanted to do it on your own, which I'm sure you will after this conversation, you can get in contact with him. And who is it going to be? It's going to be Dr. Scott Goldman. Dr. Goldman, how are you doing this morning? And welcome to Sweep Unplugged.
Oh my gosh, this is going to be a real treat. Shot out of a cannon. I like the way we're going here. Let's roll.
We try to do it the right way and the best way as possible for our guests. So any way it's possible.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for the time.
No problem. No problem. We appreciate you joining us here. And, the thing today is I do a lot of prospects for NFL drafts and NBA drafts, and I do, the mock drafts, and I do a lot of evaluations. But what's crazy is I went to your website and I said, man, I don't do this type of evaluation. I do kind of like the cover up of it. I kind of do the umbrella part. I don't get deep diving into it. So the biggest question I want to ask you first is that a lot of people think talent gets you into the NBA or into the NFL, which, yeah, a lot of it is all talent. But if you don't have it right in between the ears, that can potentially be devastating to a person's career. Sports psychology, how important is that for an athlete going from, even from high school to college to the pros if they ever make it that far?
So, it's interesting because I find it's all important. Like, you have to be this tall to ride the roller coaster. You have to have this kind of work ethic. You have to have this kind of nutrition. And what's interesting is when someone maximizes all of the different aspects of their potential, that's your Hall of Famer. And that's rare. However, there are the other opportunities where you have some people who are really strong in one area, but maybe have some kind of deficit or something else. So the different elements that comprise a human being, one, they're unbelievably complicated. And two, they're also very complementary. So, you have a guy like, and this is going to be old school basketball, but remember there was a guy, Spud Webb. I mean, he was 5'5", but he could dunk. And, so was that based off of athletic ability or was that based off of sheer will and determination? I mean, there was something inside his DNA that allowed him to overcome the height of being 5'5" and dunking. And by the way, as a guy who's 5'6", he was my personal hero in that regard.
Oh yeah, I mean, I stand 5'8", and to me, Spud Webb was 6'10". The way he could jump, and I mean, it's kind of it's kind of crazy you bring up Spud Webb, because if you look at other guys who were NBA players, let's talk about probably the smallest, and Tyrone Muggsy Bogues, who I think was 5'4", if I'm not mistaken, right around there. That takes more than just talent. That takes, like you said, the mental side, and they unlocked their potential to get to the NBA. And you're talking, this is where it differs from, you're a NBA superstar, you're going to be remembered for your game, but you're not quite at that Hall of Fame status part. And I think that's where the difference is. And that's something that I feel, after going over what I've gone over on AIQ, that could potentially be the difference between, you know, yeah, I remember in the Sandlot, the movie, where they said, heroes get remembered, but legends never die. I think this is where the separation is. If you want to be a legend, you don't only have to work hard. You got to get your mind right. You got to get, everything just unlocked. So I want to know exactly how did AIQ, how did you get started in? And then after this, we're going to dive deep into it, because unlock the potential. And I'm going to let you go over something of a certain quarterback, Johnny Utah, that I saw you had on your website. That's Keanu Reeves, obviously, in Point Break. But you like Johnny Utah. But first off, like I said, I want to get into AIQ, because if they go to AIQ.team, they can get everything there.
Yeah.
The background on that.
Yeah. And first, let me just start by saying a personal shout out to my sister, JC Taub, who worked on the movie Sandlot. So I'm glad that you referenced.
Oh, nice. Nice.
We can always throw a little bit of love to my sister who helped contribute to that legend of a film.
Nice.
So now talking about draft prospects and talent evaluation and talent development as well. What I've come to appreciate in all of my time is most people really want to be excellent. I mean, they just do. I mean, and regardless of what their craft is, they just want to be excellent. And, there's a famous psychiatrist, his name was Joseph Yalom, and he used to say that a big part of psychology is just identifying and removing the obstacles so people can naturally grow. So when my partner, Jim Bowman, and I, when we created the AIQ, it was with a very simple prospect and idea, which was, how can you fully help people be the best versions of themselves if you don't fully understand all aspects that they bring to the table? Mm. So what we noticed was in the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, MLS, etc., English Premier League, was that people were measuring their physical abilities, their size, their speed, their strength. They were measuring their experience, or their history with scouting reports and watching game film, like, like this linebacker from Alabama, we've watched 3 years of his tape, kind of thing. And they were measuring to a certain degree, but not with a great level of sophistication, their personality. Like, hey, does this guy got a good work ethic? Is he locker room toxicity? That kind of stuff, which of course can fluctuate and vary by all kinds of influences. Like maybe the player got in a fight with his parents the night before, and that set him off in a way that either improved performance or hindered it. And then the last bucket or domain that I think completes the comprehensive athletic profile is intelligence. How people go about actually solving the Rubik's Cube of the game. So, it's funny because as fans or as people who engage in the sport themselves, we're watching these people solve puzzles in live time. And the puzzles are constantly mutating and just warping and doing all kinds of neat stuff, so that, like when you make a bounce pass, or when you do a lob threat, or, when you're scanning the defense prior to a pre-snap motion. I mean, like there's so many different things that are going on that the athlete has to kind of figure out. And so some people do it with size, speed, and strength. They go, I don't care what's going on. It's like see ball, hit ball in the NFL. Yeah. And other players are doing it through experience. They're like, look, I've been playing this game since I was 6 years old, and I know how to do this. I've seen every permutation throughout my life. And some are doing it with just sheer grit and determination. Like, I don't care that I'm 5'3", I'm still going to get the ball. And some are doing it with intelligence, but most, if not all, are doing it with some combination of those four things. And the intelligence would be like, oh, hey, I see what's happening. This player's coming down, and I think I can anticipate this. I think I can engage pattern recognition and processing speed that can put me in the right place at the right time to get the job done.
We are talking to Dr. Scott Goldman. AIQ.team is where you want to go to get a lot of information as far as evaluations go. Get more information on AIQ, the assessment there. I mean, it's a whole lot of stuff for athletes. And I think I want to ask this to you as well. This is kind of what I notice, and and we talk about sports. We have a sports show, so we cover sports nonstop. And talking to we have a professional athlete on our show, a former NBA player, Derek Irvin, and he consistently says about the NBA game, and we all both complain about it. And I know you probably heard the same thing, how the game is different. It's kind of boring. It's not the way it used to be. Now, you mentioned something about talent, how kids come in at 6, 7 years old. I'm the most talented kid. I'm getting to the league based off of talent. The bridge, the gap between, 80s, 90s basketball to now, would intelligence have a whole lot to do with that? Because when Derek was playing, it was a team game. It was playing basketball the right way. It was a different concept to where now it's portrayed as it's me ball. It's all about me. So somewhere along the line, did that intelligence part of the game in training and coaching even, did it just kind of fall off a cliff?
That's a super cool question. Super cool question. I think the way I would perceive it, and this is just my opinion, having been around the NBA for a number of years, is first of all, I don't think the game is bad. I still enjoy watching basketball at the NBA and collegiate level. I just think what I would say is the game is different. Yeah. And what we're focusing on as far as mastery is different. But I think sometimes what's really cool is to go, okay, what's the same and what's different? So some of the things that are same are things like floor spacing and court mapping. Like that, back in the 80s, when you think about like the fast break Lakers, right? I mean, Magic Johnson and the puzzles that he was solving, I would love to know his AIQ score. I mean, what an unbelievably gifted player with his court vision and floor spacing. I mean, it was just brilliant, right? But you watch the modern game and you see a guy like Steph Curry or LeBron James, they're still engaged in floor spacing and they're still engaged in court vision. They're just doing it in a different way, which is they're finding the space and place where they can get a 3-point shot off versus back in the 80s, they were finding the space and the place to drive to get to the basket in the cleanest way possible. So I think when you start to look at the game almost the way like Neo from the Matrix, where you're just looking at those like those symbols going down the page, you start to see that there is a DNA flow of how intelligence is just woven into what they're doing. So I find it just to be fascinating but different, because to watch the game and to sit in on like at practices and things like that, which I have the luxury of doing, you'll really appreciate the game is just as complicated as it's ever been. It's just where they're putting their time and attention, like how to get a 3-point shot off versus back then it was how to get to the highest percentage basketball shot you can get, which was, as close to the rim. So I still find it fascinating. I just find it fascinating in a different way.
No, and when we mentioned the word boring, I think it's more because you see a 2-on-1 fast break and it always ends up in a 3-point attempt, and you're like, golly, the basketball IQ of it is to take it to the basket if you're on a 2-on-1 break, and it's more of the thought process. And again, it's such a battle because we always battle, well, is it the player? Well, the player's talented. They have a high basketball. You have to have a high basketball IQ to play in the NBA. There's no doubt about that. You have to have every fundamental, provided. Even the worst player in the NBA is still the best player outside of the NBA. So we start to think, well, does it go to coaching? Does it go, like you mentioned, it could be something outside of basketball. It could be home life. I mean, there could be something there. And that's what I really love about your website that I've gotten into a little bit more, and that's aiq.team. Again, we are talking to Dr. Scott Goldman here, and it's the idea of what is the right basketball move to make, what is the correct move to make. And I think old heads like me and Derek are like, well, that's not the right move, but the game adapts, the game changes from time every time. So something is added, something is taken away. We're not used to this, we're used to this. So I completely understand. And you hit it right on the head there. And I love the way you put that. It's not that it's boring. It's just, it's still exciting. We still get some exciting moments. I think it's like, Gen X and these guys, like old people like me. And it's like, well, you know what? I'm going to cross my hands and say, this is terrible because I'm so used to 85 to 90 scores. And I love the defensive side. And to be honest, I think the last time we saw a brilliant game was the beautiful game by the Spurs in 2014 on that championship run against Miami. But totally understand. I love the way you had put that here. And I'm going to try to present something to you here on screen. This is the first time I'm doing this on the Sweep Unplugged. So hopefully screen, it does work with me as it did. So here we go. I brought up the Johnny Utah thing for AIQ. This is on your website, by the way. So for those of you that want to check it out, aiq.team, you can go there, go under sports. You'll do the report that comes up there, the evaluation report. But this is something that fascinates because, like I said, I'm doing a breakdown on Cam Ward right now from Miami for coming to NFL draft, and I'm looking at this like this is amazing material that you provide on your website, and it goes through a whole lot. So doing an AIQ assessment for you,
Yeah.
and taking a quarterback, and we know Johnny Utah is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. There's no doubt about that. He's no Benny the Jet Rodriguez, for another Sandlot reference there, when it comes to baseball, but when you're going through an assessment, time wise, how long does these assessments take? Is there stuff that you notice that you may think, well, the staff doesn't see? I noticed this. Is it something you approach them about and say, I'm kind of concerned about this? If you can give us just a little bit of background on the assessment part, we truly would love it.
Yeah. So a couple things, and thank you for the opportunity. I always get excited to talk about the AIQ. One, Johnny Utah is actually a real player in the NFL. We just switched the name just because one thing is we always want to respect and honor the players. We won't talk about a player publicly unless they give us permission. And there's a few players that have, because we tend to work very collaboratively with the players as they're going through this process. So I always like to start off, as much fun as it is to talk about these reports, is let's always remember that this is somebody's son, this is somebody's brother, this is somebody's friend. Like, this is a human being. So, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of that. Like when a guy misses a field goal and everybody's like, oh, I hate that guy. It's like, you know what? He wasn't trying to miss the field goal. He was, it was just a bad day. And I get that it impacts you as a fan, but he's a living, breathing human being that we should give some kindness to. So I always like to start with that before I interpret. The second thing I like to emphasize is our philosophy is, if you can predict in sports, you should just go to Vegas and bet on the team that has the best numbers, kind of thing. But what we love about sports is that it is unpredictable. So you mentioned I've been in, working with professional teams and elite teams and athletes for 25 plus years.
Yes, sir.
It always was a bit of a red flag to me when a vendor would try to sell their product to our organization, when they would say, oh, I can tell you who's never going to jump off sides, or I can predict, X, Y, and Z, like who's the next Kurt Warner, or, they would always have some kind of spin. I'm like, if you can predict, it would be the death of sport. So our approach with the AIQ was, we can help people make more well-informed decisions. We believe in a couple of really important principles. One is, well-informed individuals make better choices. And the real essence of the choice is about goodness of fit. So a guy like Brock Purdy might be a beautiful match in San Francisco because of that offense and the system they run, but he might not be such a great match in, say, Pittsburgh with the Steelers because of the system and offense and style that they run. So a goodness of fit and being well informed, I think, leads to really good decision making, and that's a good indicator of success. So if you can scroll back up to the top, one
Very
of
first
the things
page.
one of the things I love to point out is, so I have spent over 10 years in the NFL. I currently work with an NFL team, and I've been embedded. I was on the sidelines for 5+ years. I was in all the install meetings. I was in the coaches meetings, players meetings, everything. So anecdotally, I went to a lot of the coaches that I worked with across the league. And I just said, for every single position, so I asked like head coaches, offensive coordinators, quarterback coaches, and I just said, what are the 5 most important cognitive abilities for a quarterback? And I did that anecdotally. Came up with, because we measure 15 points of data. We have 15 points of cognitive abilities that we go over. So we talked about identifying the most important. My partner, Jim, who is the brains of the operation and the scientist, right? He looked at where the top quarterbacks are outperforming the rest of the quarterback class in our database. You know, we have over, I want to say it's like 6,000 or 7,000 NFL players in our database. We've been collecting NFL data since 2012. So another not so humble brag, we actually have 4 peer-reviewed white papers that are published. And the reason why that's important for those that might not follow the nerd talk is a lot of products out there will go, oh, we've got good science, blah, blah, blah. But meanwhile, it's just science that their internal folks came up with that is sort of like coming to a conclusion they want. The stuff that we've published in academia, they weren't even published by us. They were published by professors that were not related or invested in our company. So they did an independent discovery where they found statistically significant correlation between NFL performance and AIQ abilities. So things like with quarterbacks, it was things like touchdowns, passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, passing yards, big throw capability, the propensity to turn the ball over, so turnover ratios. So all kinds of really important metrics we found, and that makes sense, right? Like smarter players, higher intelligent players will make better decisions on the field. So going back to it, my partner looks at where the top performance, like so a Patrick Mahomes and a Josh Allen, where did those guys outperform the rest of the quarterback? When we came back, so we did these 2 processes independent. I got the anecdotal data from the coaches. He got the analytic data from, from the NFL metrics. We came together. We had an 87% alignment that what the coaches valued was exactly where the best quarterbacks in leagues were outperforming. And that's what we're looking at right here is this positional focus. So one of the things that we highlight is even though we have 15 points of data, here's a starting point that can help you understand what the quarterback does of the most important areas. So if you look at like the very first one that's up there, learning efficiency, that's the ability to download and recall information. We are the only measure that captures that. And if you think about the ability, like for those that have been around the NFL, it's amazing how complicated the playbooks are. It's amazing how complicated the language is of play calling. It's amazing how complicated installs are every week as they have to kind of like wipe the board clean and then reinstall new plays because everybody's watching film so they catch on to your habits throughout the season. So learning efficiency is how quickly can someone absorb that information. So how many reps do they need? And then it's also like, well, once they've got it, how long can they hold on to it? So you go over, first and second downs on Thursday. Can they recall that on Sunday? If they see something in the first quarter, like, a 2-shell coverage, like the safeties are kind of doing something wonky, and the quarterback sees that in the first quarter and then throws an interception, if he sees that same formation again in the third or fourth quarter, will he go, oh, I remember what that is, and I can course correct and recalibrate to it? So one of the things that's kind of nice about our report and the way that we deliver information is we don't just talk about where cognitive abilities are important to the sport of, say, football. We talk about it as where is it most important for specific positions. So when we're talking about quarterback play and learning efficiency, it's very different than how we talk about, say, linebacker play and learning efficiency. So we have found, and again, I leaned into a lot of my relationships with coaches that I worked with. So when it came to creating some of these interpretations, I asked linebacker coaches, I asked quarterback coaches. It was all about, like, in what ways can we help the coach and the player better understand how they do what they do? Not why, but how. How did you do that? How did you figure that out?
Mm.
And so if you go now and kind of scroll down to like the second page, this is where things can be a little bit overwhelming. But again, I'm a big believer that human beings are complicated, and the process of excellence in sport is complicated. So we felt like we had to provide depth, not breadth, when it came to informing people about cognitive abilities. So we looked at things like visual spatial processing, which is all about like the speed and flow of creativity. Like, what does it look like when someone has to improvise because a play broke down?
Yeah.
How do we anticipate what's kind of going on in the chaos? And then reaction time is really about how quickly can you respond to a stimulus. So like for a quarterback, stepping up and avoiding a pass rusher who's kind of coming at the corner of his vision and headed for his legs, to sweep the leg, not sweep the league, it's kind of a deal, So, and like with reaction, our reaction time is fairly sophisticated because we don't just measure speed, we also measure their accuracy and impulsivity. And then decision making, like multiple target search, that's one of those scenarios where it's all about scanning and looking downfield. So we were talking earlier about pre-snap reads, right? And identifying the mic. So multiple target search is almost kind of like Where's Waldo? Like you're looking for minute details. So remember how we were talking about position specific. So for a quarterback, that could be him reading the defense pre-snap. It could also be him in live time scanning the field and trying to identify where his receivers are and targets are, as well as, potential threats and dangers like the defensive backs. But for a defensive back to use multiple target search, it might be something like just scanning the wide receiver that they're covering and looking for little details, because in the scouting report and watching film work, they look at all kinds of things like, if the wide receiver's got his hands up, maybe that's because he's about to jam you and it's a run play. If the wide receiver's got his, his legs in an off position, it means he's probably about to go into motion, and that might indicate him kind of going and running a crossing route, that kind of stuff. So the ability to scan as a DB for that kind of detail gives them a competitive advantage of, hey, I know what's about to happen next. So we found that, and it took us about 15 years, Jim and I, we spent 15 years developing this. We didn't just look at athletes. We also looked at other unsolvable puzzles like firefighters and military and police officer first. So, the idea was when someone has to kick a door down and scan the room for danger is the same kind of thing as what a quarterback has to do when he's scrambling and looking downfield for something that's about to open up when it hasn't quite done that yet. I mean, those are the most amazing throws to me, is when the quarterback makes a throw, not because of where things are at the moment, but where things are likely to bloom or evolve. So it's like they throw to a spot that they're hoping the wide receiver gets to, that sits between the zone that's not open yet, but will be because the quarterback's scrambling, and that's causing the zone to sort of lose its structure. I mean, it's a thing of beauty. And that's all cognitive and intelligence. I mean, that's all intelligence.
Yeah, you mentioned a quarterback, and one guy that I really remember, precise precision. I mean, Dan Marino was the type of guy that could get you a pass like no one's there, but like you said, that window opened up, and all of a sudden you see, a player just running a route, and there he is. Marino was one of the to me, probably, and I argue this so much, Dr. Goldman, that I consider Dan Marino probably the best quarterback of all time, even, ahead of guys like Tom Brady. Based off of championships, Brady's there, but Marino, I probably is the best quarterback of all time, in my opinion. And because of what you said, I think if you were to look at Dan's times, as far as decision making, reaction time, everything of the assessment, I would love to see what he would have scored on something like this.
So one thing while talking about, he is the most humble and down to earth Hall of Famer I've ever spent time with. I mean, he's a super nice person and just a really great guy to be around. And when I worked for the Miami Dolphins, he would sit in the quarterback room, and quarterback room's like one of the most sacred spaces you can be in.
Yeah.
And they invited me in. So it was like, back then it was Ryan Tannehill, Brock Osweiler, David Fales, Dan Marino, Dowell Loggins was our offense coordinator, and Adam Gase was our head coach.
Mm.
And it was amazing to hear how Dan would contribute to some of the ideas and statements that was happening in that room. It was a very special place. And what was really nice was, we would often talk about playing to our quarterback's strengths in that regard. So, hey, like Ryan Tannehill has a really strong part of this, or Ryan Tannehill could really benefit from us using some pre-snap formation, kind of disguise some of what we're doing to see if we can get the defense to reveal itself. So, again, most people know this stuff, but just in case, sometimes what all of this pre-snap motion that offenses do is to also help the quarterback identify if the defense is in zone coverage or going man-to-man, man press. So it's just, I love sports because of how unpredictable it is. So whether we're talking about the NBA and the evolution of the game, which, going back to that for a second, is like, I think it will always course calibrate, right? Like, as soon as one team has figured out a way to kind of break the system, some other team figures out how to defend that. And then as soon as that defense becomes the lockdown, then someone else innovates. I remember there's this great story about Bill Walsh creating the West Coast offense. I don't know if you've ever heard this one. So he was working the offense. He was working in Cincinnati, and the tight end lined up in the wrong formation, and the quarterback caught it, told the tight end to go to the other side of the offensive line. And when he went into formation, two linebackers bumped into each other. And the whole room watching film started laughing about this. And Bill Walsh went, what if we started to do something like that purposely? And that's how the West Coast offense was created. So again, I think intelligence is such a vital piece of sport and its evolution, because smart people come up with these creative ways of augmenting things, and then people have to calibrate to it. I mean, one of the people right now that I think is doing some brilliant stuff is Ben Johnson. Like, you watch what he's doing in Detroit with that offense. I mean, he's got wide receivers lining up as running backs just to confuse the defensive players who are going, wait, am I supposed to cover the person who's got the number on their chest that means wide receiver, or am I supposed to line up with the guy who's in the running back slot? Like, there's this one footage that's kind of going viral right now where it's Amon St. Brown he's leaning over so that the defense can't even see his number.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's just brilliant. I mean, like, that's a brilliant mechanism. And so highly intelligent people like Ben Johnson and Dan Marino, I just think they find really neat ways of navigating the space and the place of sport. And up until the AIQ, no one was measuring this stuff. And I was like, why not? I mean, this seems as important. Like, to your point, it's like Dan Marino, Tom Brady. I mean, people always talk about what a brilliant capture Tom Brady was for the New England Patriots. And I'm like, if you knew who he was, you would have taken him in the first round. You would have taken him in the sixth. And if the rest of the league knew who he was, they wouldn't have, 32 teams passed on him 5 times. Like, no one was using the AIQ back then. it's possible if that information was there, someone might have made a different decision or investment and saying, hey, this is a player we should grab.
Yeah, I understand that completely. And for me, I get a lot of pushback when I talk about prospects, especially NFL prospects and drafts, and they're saying, well, how do you not have Shador Sanders as your top quarterback? And like, I see so much in his game that would not translate to the NFL. And that's just my assessment of it. Then people start to realize, okay, I see this, I see that. So I love what you're doing at AIQ, because you're right. It's the assessment part. I mean, you're going into the NFL. You're going to play pro ball or even college ball because you're talented. No one's discrediting the talent part. It's
Well,
the intelligence part.
but if I can jump in for a sec, because you bring up
Sure.
a really good point, and I think this is something that I would love to highlight for a second.
Sure.
The college game compared to the NFL game is almost like comparing apples to giraffes. I mean, they're
Yeah.
just two different worlds. And I think it's incredibly challenging for teams, for talent evaluators like scouts and GMs and director of player personnel and all, like it's so hard. And people like yourself, it's so hard to go, all right, I'm watching somebody in one environment and I'm trying to interpret their performance and guess what it'll look like in the next environment. So I'll give you a concrete example of a team I was working with. I won't say the team and I won't say the name.
No, yeah. Correct.
There was a wide receiver who was a top 10 player, and he was physically gifted. I mean, he was tall, he was long, he was fast. I mean, brilliant. And in the college game, he only ran 3 routes. That was it.
Wow.
It was basically like a post, a fade, and a go. So it was like, I'm sorry, a flag, a post, and a go. So it was like they were all long and they were all sprint and they were all like jump balls. They would just throw them and he would get it.
Yeah.
Our wide receiver coach at the time with the team I was working for really liked this player. He's like, this guy's going to change our offense. It's going to be great. I looked at his AIQ profile, and his AIQ profile said he might struggle with multiple option route decision trees. So, most wide receivers, when they line up, they also have to interpret the defense and see what the defense is giving. And then they have to choose, which of these which route to run on the tree. Mm. So I just said, hey, I know we love his physical ability, but we've only seen him run 3 routes in college. And the wide receiver coach said, right, wait till he gets in my system where I do all this complicated stuff. He's going to be so much better because it's going to confuse the defenses and his athletic ability. It's going to be beautiful. And I said, well, my concern is his AIQ score might suggest he relies more on his physical gifts than being able to be clever in the multiple option route decision tree. The team decided to pass on the player, and the wide receiver coach was like, thanks a lot, Goldman. And I was like, first of all, I don't make these decisions. I just try to help the decision makers be more well-informed. The other team that took him that ended up taking him, again, top 10, also ran a similar kind of complicated offense, and the player really struggled. It was a bad fit. I still think this player could have been successful. Again, I don't predict success or failure. If I did, I would control the stock market and stuff. But what I did say was, I don't think this guy's going to be a great fit for us. And sure enough, he went to a team that was similar, and it wasn't a good fit. Mm-hmm. Halfway through the season, the wide receiver coach goes, hey, Doc, I think you might have saved my job. And I was like, I don't know, dude. I think you're really good at what you do. And he was like, no, you just need to hear this. If we had taken player X, it would have been a real struggle to get him up to speed with what we're doing here. And it would have taken away from some of the other wide receivers that I got to put more time and attention into developing. So he goes, yes, I was disappointed that we didn't get him. But now that I have the room that I have, I'm able to do things to such a level of complexity that I'm really enjoying this. And he was like, I just want to thank you. And I was like, that's what the AIQ is for. Putting the right people in the right position so that we have goodness of fit and optimal, increased chances of optimal performance.
And I love you put it that way, because I know earlier in the show when we were talking, you had mentioned something that I know personally Spurs fans deal with all the time. And you tend to see it a lot, and it's repeated a lot. Where sometimes you have a player in a system that just doesn't fit the system, or it fits the system. In San Antonio's case, you had a guy like Jonathan Simmons, you had Jared Jackson, you've had guys that have come in and made their name with the Spurs, go get that big contract, go get another team, and you see them struggle. And it's a system type of player. And that's something that, AIQ provides us. Hey, you know what? It's perfect for your team, but I don't know if it translates to this team. Or you know what? This guy doesn't work for your team, but he can go somewhere else. So I guess towards the back part of the show here, I wanted to ask you on the AIQ stuff, on the assessment. Say you have player A and player A doesn't work for this team right here, go somewhere else. Does that assessment follow him to the next team? And they look at it like, well, golly, this guy's going to work. I'll use case in point here. And, it's just throwing a player out there because it's kind of a guy that's already, it's hitting his stride. You saw a guy like Baker Mayfield get drafted by the Browns. It wasn't a working out there. You saw him go to the Rams. He's been to a couple places. Now he seems to have found his stride in Tampa Bay. And this is the kind of player that everybody was expecting Baker to be. So the point you're making about a player may not work here, may work somewhere else. Does that assessment go with them everywhere they go to, where coaches are like, hey, this may fit us?
Yeah. So there's a longer answer there, but it's another great question. Intelligence is a genetically stable trait. Mm-hmm. So we believe that once you get a good capture of their abilities, it can go with them because it is what it is, like saying his eye color is blue or his eye color is brown. Mm-hmm. The other thing is we're very player friendly. We have found agents tend to really like us because we're very respectful and we're very collaborative. So agents and players like us because we will offer the report to any player who wants it. So if a team is under contract with us, they'll have his report and they can go from day one. If a team doesn't have a contract with us, the player can still take his report and give it to the coach and say, hey, this is something that I've been exposed to, and this is some of what it told me. And I think that stuff is really cool. So, yes, it can go with them. It can travel with them. Because ultimately, when Jim and I created this thing, we just wanted to help. I've never met a player who loves to get mother effed. And I've never met a coach who really loves to mother F players. They'll do it because they don't know what else to do. But it's based on frustration, right? There's just something that's kind of needing to be unlocked between the coach and the player dynamic. And I think this is a piece of information that might help lock it down. There's that old adage, they either don't know or they don't care. And more often than not, people default to, oh, he doesn't care, he doesn't love ball. Well, what if he's got something that's the equivalent of a learning disability? So it is that he does care, but he just can't see it. The way someone with dyslexia has certain words turned around. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean they can't be an actor. It just means for them to read the script, it requires a different way or strategy of learning those lines. So same thing is if someone's got, a low score on the AIQ, and notice I never say good or bad, I say high or low. If someone's got a low score, it's okay, what's our solution? How do we compensate for that? And that's, I think the thing that really fills me with a lot of pride and joy is the wide receiver coach that says, hey, I think you saved my career. It's also the player who goes, you know what, I was really, really frustrated. And then this piece of information you helped me generate a solution. So now I can do the things that I really want to do. Because as we get to the next level, everybody is big, strong, and fast. The speed of all games at the professional level, NBA, NFL, they're so fast that I think what happens is those that struggle without coming up with solutions for their problem solving, their intelligence, that's what gets exposed at the next level.
Yeah, it's, a lot of it goes into it. And I'm glad that, that I was able to understand it because like I said, the evaluations I do never go into too much depth. I I go into depth in some aspects of the game, but as a person from the outside looking in who doesn't do it professionally, like I said, it's just kind of a broader view when I do my prospects analysis and say, okay, well, this is who I think fits here, fits there. It goes even for free agency and everything like that. So we are talking to Dr. Scott Goldman, AIQ.team. Great website. I mean, as you can see, he has a player evaluation up there. It goes into quite a lot of depth. And you know what? It's something that is taken for granted a lot of times here. You think, well, golly, this guy is arm strength is there. He can get the ball there. I mean, he's just going to be the next best quarterback. And a lot of it has to do with more than just talent, as we've been saying throughout the show. It's everything. It's from head to toe. It's an entire part of the body. It's what's between the ears. And I'm glad we were able to talk to Dr. Scott Goldman today here on Sweep Unplugged. Dr. Goldman, you provided so much information. I'm going to have to reevaluate my choices when I make prospect evaluations now, because I'm thinking, man, I got to go into way more depth. But I appreciate you joining us this morning and providing all this information. Didn't even get to cover the other part I wanted to, but we can always save that for another cold, rainy day, I'm sure.
I'm sure we can do a part 2. This was a lot of fun. I can't thank you enough for the time and the conversation. Your questions were awesome. I mean, really great stuff to dialogue about. So thank you.
That is Dr. Scott Goldman. Again, AIQ.team if you want to get the information. And not only sports related, can also transition into the business world as well. So definitely want to check that out there. The AIQ.team website provides everything. So for another edition of Sweep Unplugged, like we say, go to our YouTube page, search Sweep the League TV, be a subscriber. We can get this show. You can get every show that we've done for Sweep Unplugged. Also, Sweep the League TV comes to you Monday through Friday at 9 p.m. Myself, Derek Gervin. So for Dr. Scott Goldman, it's Rudy Campos Jr. for Sweep Unplugged. Until we talk again, we'll see you later, Knuckleheads.